Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today we are checking out the GeForce RTX 4070 for the first time. I suppose the first thing you want to know is, how much does it cost? Well, it is $600 US, and that's quite a substantial 25% discount when compared to the TI version. Though having said that, just based off the specs alone, we do expect it to be around 20% slower. Still, the good news, I suppose, is that you're still getting the same 12GB of VRAM as the 4070 Ti. So the 4070 is looking pretty good, and I'm very excited to check it out. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new 12th Gen CPU contact frame by DeBauer. It's well known that the integrated loading mechanism, or ILM, of the LJ1700 sockets bends 12th Gen CPUs, leading to an uneven contact surface that reduces cooling performance. Solving this issue, the contact frame replaces the ILM, allowing for a much more even contact with the CPU's IHS and the base of your cooler, which in turn reduces operating temperatures. Installation's quick and easy, and thanks to the use of anodized aluminium, the contact frame is non-conductive. And then, for those of you who wish to further maximize contact, Thermal Grizzly now offers an optional lapping tool, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so let's quickly go over the specs, and then of course we will jump into the benchmarks. Like the 4070 Ti, the new non-Ti version, it's based on the AD104 silicon, though of course it's a cut-down version with 5,888 CUDA cores. So that's 23% fewer than the Ti. There's also 23% fewer texture units and 20% fewer ROP units. The base and boost clocks have also been lowered. The base to 1920 MHz, that's 17% lower, while the boost clocks have only been reduced by 5%. As for memory, NVIDIA is still using 21 gigabits per second GDDR6X on a 192-bit wide bus for a bandwidth of 504 gigabytes per second. And as noted earlier, you're still getting 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which we now believe to be the minimum amount of VRAM that should be provided on a graphics card not targeting entry-level performance. And I'll talk more about that towards the end of the video. Now, NVIDIA is producing a Founders Edition version of the RTX 4070, which isn't something they did for the 4070 Ti, which is a bit curious. And with a total graphics power rating of just 200 watts, NVIDIA's been able to create a dual slot card. And I have to say, after becoming so accustomed, let's say, to massive 4090, 4080, and 4070 Ti graphics cards, the 4070, it seems very small, but actually it's fairly typical when compared to previous generation models, matching the size and weight of the RTX 3070 Fe, for example. Now, NVIDIA's RTX 4070 Fe does use a single 12 VHP WR connector, and included is a dual 8-pin adapter. However, NVIDIA's board partners are free to use the more standard 8-pin connector if they wish, and are only required to use a single 8-pin connector. On hand, I have MSI's Ventus 3X model, which does use a single 8-pin power input, and it's a long triple fan card that does only require 2 expansion slots, so it's nice, and we'll look at stuff like thermals and power soon. Now, something a bit different about this release is that there are 2 separate embargoes, one for non-overclocked models like NVIDIA's FE card and MSI's Ventus 3X, and then a second embargo which is to be lifted 24 hours later, covering the overclocked partner models. NVIDIA does appear to be prioritizing reviews of models that are meant to sell, or at least very near, the $600 US MSRP, while the more premium OC cards can only be reviewed once on sale the following day. So NVIDIA really wants to make it clear to viewers that the RTX 4070 is a $600 US product, but how true that ultimately ends up being is of course yet to be seen. Expect them to sell out, and of course prices will get inflated. You will really only know the true pricing and state of availability of at least a few weeks after launch. Pretty typical stuff. The 4070 Ti, for example, it's not quite $800 US, $810 to $820 are the cheaper models, but it's very close. And then we see Supreme X, Strix, and Aorus models. They're all selling up around $950 US, which is an absurd price for a graphics card with just 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Now for testing, I'm still using our Ryzen 7 5800X 3D test system with 32GB of DDR5 3200 dual rank memory, but this generally isn't an issue for 1440p benchmarks, and it certainly won't be a problem at 4K. Still, as of next week, I do plan to start updating all of our GPU data with many new games and titles on our 7800X 3D test system. So we will have fresh data with less CPU bottlenecking for future GPU releases. For now though, the 5800X 3D will have to do. Then for the graphics card, we will be using MSI's RTX 4070 Ventus 3X, and I also have the FE model on hand, but we'll base all our results on MSI's model, but performance between these two cards is identical. Okay, let's go over the data. First up, we have Watch Dogs Legion, and here at 1440p, the RTX 4070 was good for 127 FPS on average, making it a fraction slower than the 3090 Ti, which meant it was also slower than the 6800 XT. This also meant it was just 13% slower than the 4070 Ti, but also 23% slower than the 7900 XT. So in short, we're looking at roughly previous generation high-end performance for $600, so again, about what you would have paid for a 6800 XT. Jumping up to the 4K resolution doesn't change much here. The RTX 4070 was good for 72 FPS, which is very much 6800 XT-like performance, making it 19% slower than the Ti model. Then when compared to previous generation GeForce GPUs, it was 3% faster than the RTX 3080 and 26% faster than the 3070 Ti. Next up, we have Rainbow Six Extraction, and here the 4070 was good for 191 FPS, which is very much RTX 3080 levels of performance, making it 26% faster than the 3070 Ti. It was also 10% faster than the 6800 XT, but 7% slower than the similarly priced 6950 XT, and that is of course based on current retail pricing, not the MSRPs. We're also looking at an 18% performance deficit to the 4070 Ti and 20% to the 7900 XT. The 4070 though, it's still very capable at the 4K resolution, rendering just shy of 100 FPS, which this time meant 6950 XT and RTX 3080 like performance, so not bad for $600 US. The margin remained much the same to the Ti version, this time trailing by 19%. The Far Cry 6 results are CPU limited at 1440p, which is less of an issue for the RTX 4070 and more of an issue for the faster GPUs. For example, here it was 6% slower than the 4070 Ti, though it was 16% slower than the 7900 XT. And then moving to 4K, this does solve the CPU limited issue, and now the 4070 is 14% slower than the 4070 Ti and 31% slower than the 7900 XT. In this example, we're basically looking at RTX 3080 levels of performance. Moving on to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we see that at 1440p, the 4070 is 16% slower than the Ti model and a massive 27% slower than the 7900 XT. Still, we are looking at 3080 Ti, 3090 and 6900 XT-like performance, so I think for $600 US that's an impressive result, despite being a more mild 19% boost over the 3070 Ti. Then at 4K, we're looking at much the same. Here the 4070 was 15% slower than the 4070 Ti, though when compared to the previous generation products, it was delivering 6800 XT and RTX 3080 performance. Next we have Hunt Showdown, and no surprises here, the RTX 4070 is delivering 6800 XT performance, so slightly slower than the RTX 3080 in this example, and just 14% faster than the RTX 3070 Ti. The results at 4K are even less favourable. Here the 4070 was just 6% faster than the 3070 Ti, making it 8% slower than the 6800 XT, and 21% slower than the 4070 Ti. The Outer Worlds saw the 4070 pumping out 141 FPS at 1440p, which positioned it between the 6800 XT and 3080 in our graph. So fairly typical results here. It was also just 14% slower than the 7900 XT and 16% slower than the 4070 Ti, which is a good result when compared to those more expensive models. We find much the same at the 4K resolution. Here the 4070 is now 17% slower than the 4070 Ti and 16% slower than the 7900 XT, while 76 FPS on average meant that we were looking at 6900 XT-like performance. The RTX 4070 rips through the Modern Warfare 2 benchmark with 182 FPS, making it just 11% slower than the 4070 Ti, though it was 32% slower than the 7900 XT. Still, when compared to previous generation products, the new 4070 was comparable to the 6800 XT, which meant it was actually faster than the 3090 Ti. Then at 4K, we're again looking at 6800 XT performance, though this time that did make it slightly slower than the 3090 Ti, which is obviously still a very good result. The RTX 4070 looks well down on our Hitman 3 graph at 1440p, but with 147 FPS on average, it was 4% faster than the RTX 3080 and just 3% slower than the 6800 XT. That said, it was around 20% slower than the 4070 Ti and 7900 XT. Jumping up to the 4K resolution, it did provide the higher core count models with an advantage, as here the 4070 was now 30% slower than the 4070 Ti and 38% slower than the 7900 XT, which is quite a substantial margin. Still, when compared to the previous generation parts, we are looking at RTX 3080 levels of performance, so the 4070 is certainly no slouch here. Next up we have F122, and by default this game does enable ray tracing with the ultra high preset, so we've left the RTFX enabled. Here the 4070 was good for 90 FPS at 1440p, making it 10% faster than the RTX 3080 and just 3% slower than the 7900 XT. Moreover, it was just 10% slower than the 4070 Ti, so a really good result here for NVIDIA's new $600 offering. Then at 4K, we're looking at RTX 3080 Ti and 3090 performance, making the 4070 only slightly slower than the 7900 XT in this example. Then we see that it's 13% slower than the 4070 Ti, so again a good result here for the 4070. The 4070 doesn't look amazing in our Cyberpunk 2077 benchmark. Here it rendered just 80 FPS on average, making it 25% slower than the 4070 Ti and a massive 32% slower than the 7900 XT. And then when compared to previous generation products, we're only looking at RX 6800 levels of performance, though that still meant that it was 14% faster than the 3070. And performance margins are much the same at 4K. Here the 4070 was 24% slower than the Ti model and 37% slower than the 7900 XT. Meanwhile, we're again looking at RX 6800 levels of performance, making it slightly faster than the 3070 Ti. It also has to be said that the 4070 was rather unimpressive in Dying Light 2, at least relative to parts like the 7900 XT, which was 35% faster, or even the Ti model, which was 29% faster. Having said that though, it was 20% faster than the 3070 Ti, as it was able to deliver RTX 3080-like performance. Meanwhile, the 4K data is even less impressive. Here the 4070 was just 15% faster than the 3070 Ti, making it 8% slower than the 3080 and RX 6800. The Halo Infinite results look much better. At 1440p, the 4070 finds itself situated between the 3090 and 3090 Ti, making it 15% faster than the 6800 XT and 17% faster than the 3080. It was also just 4% slower than the 7900 XT, though it was still 18% slower than the Ti version. Then at 4K, we're looking at 68 FPS on average, which is still 3080 Ti/3090 levels of performance, and only slightly slower than the 6950 XT, so a good result overall. And last up, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and we're not using the built-in benchmark here. Rather, we're measuring in-game performance using the demanding village section. Here the 4070 rendered 139 FPS, which is 6900 XT and RTX 3090-like performance, making it 17% slower than the 4070 Ti. And then increasing the resolution to 4K did reduce the average frame rate to 74 FPS, but we're still looking at 3080 and at 6800 XT levels of performance, making the 4070 18% slower than the Ti model. Okay, so here's a look at the 13 game average, and we find that the 4070 was good for 126 FPS at 1440p, which is the exact same result we received from the 6800 XT, and this meant the 4070 was on average 4% faster than the RTX 3080 and 24% faster than the 3070 Ti. Impressively, it was also just 7% slower than NVIDIA's previous generation flagship, the 3090, or 14% slower than the refreshed 3090 Ti, which did eventually become the 30 series flagship. That means it was also just 14% slower than AMD's flagship, the 6950 XT, or just 7% slower than the 6900 XT, which was the original flagship. Then when compared to the 4070 Ti, the 4070 was 18% slower and 22% slower than the 7900 XT. And then we see when increasing the resolution to 4K, the RTX 4070 was able to deliver on average 69 FPS, which meant it was once again neck and neck with the 6800 XT. Therefore, it was 20% slower than the Ti model and 27% slower than the 7900 XT. Then just quickly, for those of you interested, here's a look at the more CPU-limited 1080p data using the Ryzen 7 5800X3D. Again, I will be moving to the 7800X3D shortly, but for now, here is our 1080p results using the slightly slower previous generation processor. And in this more CPU-limited example, the 4070 was just 14% slower than the Ti model, and it's 16% slower than the 7900 XT. Now, before wrapping up the testing, here's a look at ray tracing and DLSS performance at 1440p in a few titles, starting with F122. Here the 4070 was just 10% slower than the Ti model when running with ray tracing enabled, and then just 4% slower with RT disabled. though we're likely running into the limits of our 5800X 3D CPU here. Still, it's interesting to note that with ray tracing enabled, the 4070 was 14% slower than the 3090 Ti, but with DLSS enabled, performance was much the same, and then with RT disabled, the 4070 was 15% faster, so some interesting scaling there. We're also looking at similar ray tracing performance to that of the 7900 XT, so I think it's fair to say the 4070 is much better value when it comes to ray tracing performance. Next we have Watch Dogs Legion, and here the 4070 was 19% slower than the 4070 Ti when using ray tracing and 13% slower with RT disabled. Then when compared to the 3090 Ti, it was 22% slower using ray tracing, but just 3% slower with RT disabled. And finally, when compared to the 7900 XT, we find that the 4070 was 11% slower with ray tracing enabled, and a much more substantial 23% slower with it disabled. Moving on to the Guardians of the Galaxy, we see that the 4070 is 16% slower than the 4070 Ti with ray tracing enabled, and then 21% slower than the 3090 Ti, but also 5% faster than the 7900 XT. Then with RT disabled, it's 11% slower than the 7900 XT and 4070 Ti. Next up, we have Fortnite using hardware ray tracing with Lumen and Nanite enabled. Here the 4070 was 16% slower than the 4070 Ti and 3090 Ti, and then 21% slower than the 7900 XT. And I should note that so far we are seeing strong RT performance from RDNA 3 using the Unreal Engine 5, though it is unclear if this will be the case for all games using this new game engine. The 4070 performed very well in Doom Eternal using the Ultra Nightmare preset. We're looking at 249 FPS on average with ray tracing enabled, making it 16% slower than the 4070 Ti and 12% slower than the 3090 Ti. That said, it was 20% slower than the 7900 XT, and the Radeon GPU does appear to perform very well in this title. And that's especially true with RT disabled, where it was almost 60% faster than the 4070. Resident Evil Village also plays well on the 7900 XT, but even so, the more affordable RTX 4070 was still very impressive here, pumping out 144 FPS using the ray tracing preset at 1440p, making it 16% slower than the 4070 Ti and 18% slower than the 3090 Ti. The Spider-Man Remastered results are unfortunately quite CPU limited with ray tracing enabled, though probably less so in the case of the 4070 as it was 12% slower than the 4070 Ti and 17% slower than the 7900 XT. Still, 116 FPS on average is impressive, and DLSS was able to bump that up to 128 FPS. The last ray tracing title we're going to look at is Cyberpunk 2077, and this is an extremely demanding game even without ray tracing, so unsurprisingly, the RTX 4070 is limited to just 39 FPS here, though DLSS quality mode did drastically improve performance, getting us up to 69 FPS. In this example, the 4070 was 24% slower than the 4070 Ti and 3090 Ti, but beat the 7900 XT by an 11% margin. Of course, the 7900 XT was much faster with RT disabled, but if you care about ray tracing, the 4070 represents really great value at $600 US. Now, one aspect of the RTX 4070 that's particularly impressive is power efficiency. Here we're measuring total system usage, and as you can see, the 4070 allowed for a total system consumption of 318 watts, which is 11% less than the RTX 3070, and that is a super impressive result given that it was roughly 40% faster in this test. And we find much the same in the other games tested. Doom, for example, saw total system usage hit 314 watts, which is a 10% reduction when compared to the 3070, and a 26% reduction when compared to the 6800 XT, which delivered a similar level of performance. Dying Light 2 saw more of the same, 314 watts of total system usage here, which was a good improvement over the previous generation models. Now, if we lock the frame rate at 90 FPS, we see just how efficient the RTX 4070 really is. Here, total system usage dropped by 4% when compared to the 4070 Ti, and a massive 22% when compared to the 7900 XT. That is a remarkable power saving at the same performance level, so excellent work here by NVIDIA. Okay, so now it's time for the all-important cost per frame, and we'll start with the MSRP figures. Based on our 1440p data, the $600 MSRP makes the RTX 4070 the best value GPU released at this performance tier for this generation and last. Though to be fair, AMD is yet to release a $600 RDNA 3 competitor, but still, When compared to the Radeon RX 6000 and GeForce 30 series offerings, the 4070 looks very good, at least based on MSRP pricing. Still, if NVIDIA can deliver RTX 4070s at $600 US, then it will be a good value product, at least relative to what we've seen from AMD and NVIDIA so far. We've often talked about how the 6800 XT and RTX 3080 10GB were the last sensible high-end products, and the RTX 4070 is delivering similar performance at a more competitive price. Of course, we're only talking about an 8% improvement over the 6800 XT after 2 and a bit years, but compared to what we've been getting, that's actually a really good result, I'm sorry to say. It's also an 18% improvement from the RTX 3080 and a 19% improvement over the terrible value 3070 Ti, which we can probably ignore for the majority of these comparisons. On that note, I feel that the 4070 is best compared in terms of value with either the RTX 3080 10GB or RTX 3070. When compared to the 3070, we're looking at an 8% improvement in cost per frame, so the same margin seen when comparing with the 6800 XT or the plain old 6800. So that's good, but it's certainly not mind-blowing. Basically, the 4070 is 20% more expensive than the RTX 3070 and offers on average 31% more performance. So again, that's good. It's certainly an improvement and much better than what we've been getting up to this point with the latest generation of products. Now, if we look at the typical current retail prices for each product, or at least for the products that can still be purchased, brand new, we find that the RTX 4070 is less attractive when compared to many of the previous generation of Radeon GPUs. I'd say the 6950 XT is a particular standout here, as it's just $50 more than the claimed MSRP for the RTX 4070, but offers 16% more performance on average. The 6950 XT also provides 4GB of additional VRAM, though RT performance is weaker and you miss out on features like DLSS and of course frame generation, which are probably worth paying a premium for, depending on the type of gaming you do. The 7900 XT also is quite appealing here at $800, which is quite a bit more than the RTX 4070, but you're getting loads more VRAM at 20GB and almost 30% more performance. So I'd say the 7900 XT will turn out to be a significantly better investment, but that is merely a guess on my part. Overall, while there are viable Radeon alternatives right now, and even with a direct RDNA 3 competitor which is yet to release, I'd say the RTX 4070 is still a compelling option at $600 US. Finally, here's a quick look at operating temperatures after an hour of load inside a closed ATX case. MSI's Ventus 3X peaked at just 64 degrees with a fan speed of 1400 RPM, so this card was whisper quiet and very cool. Impressive results for sure, and they prove that all you need for optimal operation with an RTX 4070 is one of these base model MSRP cards, at least from MSI. Then we have NVIDIA's FE model, which ran slightly hotter, peaking at 67 degrees, with a slightly louder fan speed of 1700 RPM. Still, that's an exceptionally good result, especially given how compact the FE model is, but the MSI card was cooler and quieter. So there you have it. Radeon RX 6800 XT / GeForce RTX 3080 10GB performance for $600 US. It's not exactly mind-blowing stuff after about 2.5 years. It's a $50 to $100 discount based on those older products, and that is assuming that they're all sold at the MSRP. Having said that though, I think given the current market, where things happen to be, it is a rather good deal, and it's certainly much closer to an acceptable price tag, let's say, at least in our opinion, than any of the other current generation GPU releases so far. Ideally, the GeForce RTX 4070 should be a $500 US product, at least in our view, and while $600 is a 20% markup, it's still much closer to our ideal price than anything that's come before it. So that makes it really difficult to criticize the $600 MSRP, especially given that it makes the RTX 4070 the best value current and previous generation GPU priced above $500, while also including support for technologies such as DLSS 3. And speaking of DLSS 3, the reason why there are no DLSS 3 benchmarks in this review is the same reason given in our RTX 4080 review. So for a more detailed explanation, please watch our day 1 RTX 4080 review. But in short, a big issue with DLSS 3 benchmarks is reporting frame generation as an FPS metric. And this is because 120 FPS, for example, using DLSS 3 frame generation really isn't 120 FPS. It's the smoothness of 120 FPS, but with the input of roughly half that frame rate, plus a few graphical issues. So really, this is a smoothness technology rather than a performance enhancing technology. And this is a serious issue for benchmark graphs, and I would suggest any reviewer benchmarking with frame generation enabled should report the numbers as, let's say, 120 DLSS 3.0 FPS, just as an example. Okay, so as I said, in the current market, the RTX 4070 happens to be a rather good deal. That said, it's not hands down the best deal. For example, the 6800 XT, that can be had for a little bit less right now, around $570, and it offers more VRAM. But you'll have to weigh that up against the lack of DLSS support and the inferior ray tracing performance. I think personally, I would still go with the RTX 4070. The higher end 6950 XT, that makes a stronger case for itself with around 15% more performance on average, and as a result comes in at a saving of 7% per frame. Again, the same cons and pros do apply here. It's certainly a tougher choice to make, and for me, it would really depend on the games I play as to which one of these two cards I'd pick. And there's also a case that can be made for the Radeon RX 7900 XT, and frankly, that's probably the hardest choice for me. Sure, the 7900 XT, it's quite a bit more costly at $800 US, but in terms of cost per frame, it is much the same, given that on average it's almost 30% faster. And the big draw card for me here is that extra 8GB of VRAM. 12GB to 20GB is a massive upgrade, and I fully expect this wide disparity in capacity to hand the 7900 XT a serious visual advantage in the not too distant future, much like what we're currently seeing when comparing the RX 6800 and RTX 3070 in modern games. Of course, as I've noted, $200 US is still quite a lot of money, but if you're planning on holding on to your next graphics card for 3 to 4 years, then I think going for something that's got a bigger frame buffer and also provides a good chunk of extra performance now is a good idea. And as a side note, I'd be just as happy to upsell you on a GeForce GPU, but stretching the budget to around $1,200 US, so double, for the 16GB RTX 4080, it just seems a bit too far-fetched for the future-proofing angle. And while on the topic of VRAM, I will quickly just note that 12GB is now what we consider to be the bare minimum. So that is to say you shouldn't purchase a graphics card with less than 12GB, certainly not when spending over $1,200 US. It is our opinion that 8GB should only be reserved for the most entry-level gaming products, and anything with less than 8GB isn't suitable for current generation gaming. Really, the RTX 4070 should have at least 16GB of VRAM, and the same is also true for the Ti model, more so in fact. That said, I'm not saying the 12GB VRAM buffer is a deal breaker. Rather, I'm cautioning you that this is now the bare minimum moving forward, and therefore this product might not age as well as those with 16GB or more VRAM. Keeping all of that in mind, I still believe that the RTX 4070 is a good value product, packing a strong feature set and excellent performance. Once remaining RDNA 2 stock for the 6800 XT and 6950 XT dries up, there will be nothing that can hold a candle to the value of the RTX 4070. That is until AMD gets their act together and releases more affordable RDNA 3 GPUs, but of course we're yet to see what will be on offer there, and with no announcements just yet, I don't necessarily recommend you wait. In a nutshell, I am very happy that the RTX 4070 has turned out to be a product that we can recommend. And I expect this product to sell pretty well because of that. That is, of course, assuming that the $600 US MSRP is met, and NVIDIA along with their partners can supply plenty of these MSRP models like the Ventus 3X. And that is going to do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this review of the RTX 4070. Of course, let me know what you think about this product at $600 US in the comment section below, and I'll be sure to read your comments. Also, you can become a Hardware Unboxed member by signing up to Floatplane or Patreon. That'll give you access to our exclusive Discord server. A really great place to talk tech without having to deal with all the other drama. Cool place to hang out. Doesn't matter if you're like AMD, Intel or NVIDIA, or just good value hardware. You won't be attacked for your opinions there, unlike other places where you can talk about tech. So yeah, cool place to hang out. We also have a live stream where you can ask Tim and I questions live, behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff, a lot of cool things there. So yeah, if you're interested, check that out. But if not, that is perfectly fine, and I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.